Migrating to Australia. I'm Grant Williams. I'm not the expert. I'm speaking with the expert, David Bongiorno, immigration lawyer. Hello, David.
What a weekend to be alive. It's sunshine in Melbourne and we're feeling better than we have been in the past. How are you?
Pandemic fatigue, but
That's
otherwise,
why the sunshine's a welcome respite. Give a
yeah,
bit of joy to our lives.
yep. But we've got news. We've actually got some news that is newsy. David Bongiorno with breaking news.
Look, you know what? It's worth a podcast on it because on Friday, the federal government made announcements about when Australians can leave, when Australians can travel to Bali. Actually, we don't know. We don't know from
Yeah,
the travel announcement on Friday where people will be able to go to, but
that's
we know
right.
that people will be allowed to go somewhere.
So I
And
was
there's
going to
all
pull
there's
you up on that. We
no,
don't
no. As soon as
actually
I
know. We don't actually know where we can go and where we can come back from.
that's but we can go.
Yeah, except
Uh,
that fully vaccinated Australians can
du-
travel,
Double
and
dose with an accepted vaccine,
yeah,
Pfizer, AstraZeneca,
Sinovac, and
Moderna, Sinovac. Well, Sinovac, the Therapeutic Goods Act, have they given Sinovac the thumbs up?
what they've done is any of the vaccines that are manufactured in India and Sinovac have been okayed for travellers coming in, so they'll be accepted as vaccination for coming in, but if you've got a stock of Sinovac in your fridge at home, you can't sell that to the chemist because you can't administer Sinovac or the Indian manufactured ones here. So it's going to be accepted for travel purposes that
Coming
you
in.
are double vaxxed with Sinovac. It's not a vaccine that you can use here. Like Australians can't get it in Australia, and that's unlikely to happen. But if you are an Australian who has been Sinovac'd, or you're in India, if you've been a resident in India and you've been vaxed and you're an Australian, um, those vaccines will be accepted for the purposes of returning back to Australia.
But Friday wasn't about returning to Australia. Friday was about leaving Australia. And leaving in Australia is what lots of Australian permanent residents and Australian citizens have wanted to do. I talked about this to a few people on Friday, and they all wanted to know about temporary residents. And obviously, they will come in the queue shortly thereafter. But from sometime next month, possibly issued with a caveat, December as opposed to November, because Grant, we don't know. The
But
Prime Minister said November. We don't know.
the premiers aren't saying that yet. But
No.
the important thing about the returning to Australia, the people, citizens and permanent residents returning to Australia, the fully vaxxed thing is actually important, but only in that it is going to, depending on the trials that are being run in South Australia and New South Wales, you might be quarantining for as little as 5 days rather than 14 days at least. They're going to try and reduce your quarantine and also where you can quarantine. The idea is that you can quarantine at home for maybe 5 days instead of 14 days in an approved facility.
We have to watch the space to see what actually happens. What we're talking about today was what was put out. Whether it's realised sooner or later remains to be seen, and in what form it finalises also remains to be seen. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, Grant. It's coming. It's just a matter of when it.
It's funny that we talk about our prime minister being the prime minister for announcements because you sent me the info from the government, and then I like this little bit that where we're talking about returning to Australia.
Yeah, it doesn't talk about temporary residents. It's only talking about, and it's not talking about eligible New Zealand
That's right. It's
citizens,
only Australian
citizens
citizens
and permanent residents.
residents, but where is it? Here we are. In the quarantine section,
Mm.
it's you this may involve quarantining, may involve home quarantine for a reduced period of time. But this is the key. You must check with the state or territory that you are returning to for their quarantine arrangements. Then it says further information is unavailable on the Home Affairs COVID. So that
Everything media releases put out post haste
yeah,
with
and the states are driving the majority of this process. As somebody did say in a press conference with the Prime Minister yesterday, so that you might live in Perth or Melbourne or Adelaide or Brisbane and you fly into Sydney and everyone is happy with you flying into Sydney, but then you just might be stuck in Sydney. Yep. So there's still a whole lot of issues, but at least if you're couch surfing in, in Czechoslovakia and you're stuck and your lease is finished and you're really homeless, at least you'll be able to be homeless in an Australian summer. So, I mean, that's a bonus, isn't it?
It makes you wonder. It's something to clutch at, something to give Australian citizens, Australian permanent residents trapped abroad some hope. Temporary residents, eligible New Zealand citizens, all others, watch the space because we don't know what's happening with them. They will shortly follow, I presume, once the program successfully begins for Australian citizens and Australian permanent residents. Uh, Quarantining, as you said, is a state and territory responsibility. So yeah, I don't know if it'll be a smooth run or not, but people can travel. One would assume those who are wanting to travel will be able to go to the United States, the United Kingdom, Western Europe.
I don't know about that. I don't know that the United States would be
Oh, if you're
one.
AstraZeneca, they're not recognizing AstraZeneca, are they?
Yeah, I would think there'd be a lot of America is still hotspot. It's more dangerous to go to America than to go to Hong Kong or whatever.
Hmm.
So
Hong
there's going to
Kong's
be a whole lot of
Hong Kong's dangerous for the waistline for me. I put about 10 kilos when I lived there.
there's going to be a whole lot of decisions that are made probably for reasons other than health. I
Yeah,
would
absolutely.
it,
We won't get political though because
and again, we don't know, and it's only going to take one outbreak in. Look, we don't know, but let's just say New South Wales at the moment is trending down the number of cases and everything. That's all is really positive. But if there's another massive outbreak and they get back over 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 cases a day, and if the hospital system is actually under pressure, they're going to put the entry caps on again because
100%,
because
absolutely.
because hey, show me a jurisdiction in the world that isn't looking for more nurses and doctors at the moment. It's a finite resource, and you can't build a new hospital tomorrow and magic nurses out of the air. And
So Australia is moving heaven and earth to bring doctors and nurses in to plug our shortfalls. But
as is,
that's to the detriment of countries like Malaysia and the Philippines, who
but
lose
as
their nurses
is
and who lose
Canada,
their doctors to us. Well, our benefit, their loss.
yeah, but as is Canada, as is the US, as is the UK, as is South Africa, as is everywhere, all the European countries. Everyone's looking for nurses and for doctors and whatnot.
They're worth their weight in gold for all of us. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
What you
you
go?
just produce one in 6 months. You know,
No, no, you can't. Correct. One of the things for people listening, um, it may you may feel left out because Australian citizens and Australian permanent residents are getting the gong to travel ahead of you. But as Grant has quite rightly pointed out, it's a movable feast, and things will most certainly be subject to change. Outbreaks. What's the African variant? If the African variant
well,
comes to town,
yeah, there's a South African variant. There's a variant that's circulating in Peru that both seem to be somewhat resistant to the vaccines.
what I want though, people listening who are thinking about applying for an exemption to leave, particularly students who are finishing their courses in Australia at the end of this year in a couple of months' time, I don't want you to go and apply for an exemption before you leave to leave. I don't want you to leave because of what Grant and I are discussing. It's too dangerous. We don't want you to see locked out. You may be able to apply for exemptions and you may get an exemption, and that's great. But Grant, correct me if I'm wrong here. What's an exemption worth if you can't get a flight back?
Or the other thing that there might be flights available, but that the New South Wales government says we're not taking 4,000 people a week. We're only taking um, we're only taking 1,000, and then all of a sudden the airlines go, "What's the point of flying? We can't fly a full plane, so we just won't go." Um,
Exemption's not worth the paper it's
no.
printed on.
So the idea of travel at the moment is just a bad idea. And look, we were discussing off camera before we clicked the go. There's some really difficult political issues coming up regarding travel, and international sportsmen is going to be one of those issues, vaccination status and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think anyone wants to make it more difficult for international students to come back. So I I think if you're a student who is a temporary resident. I think,
Stay here and be safe.
and if
But
you're
if
offshore, just sit there with fingers crossed because in all of the discussions that have been happening, you are the priority group apart from Australian citizens and permanent residents who are stranded offshore.
your
The,
term will ultimately come, it's been a long time, but it will come.
and in all of the discussions, people are now starting to talk about international students. Yeah, fingers
People
crossed. Fingers
people
crossed.
people may have compelling, compassionate circumstances to leave, and if they do have compelling and compassionate circumstances to leave, as you and I know, Grant, compelling, compassionate is never good news. It's always sad news. It's always bad news. You're not leaving for an emergency to celebrate something. You're leaving for an emergency to stem something, stop something, say goodbye to someone. So if you do have compelling, compassionate circumstances, by all means, make an exemption request before you leave. Do not leave without the granting of the exemption because you may well be locked out on return or you will be locked out.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, just play it safe. Now,
But if family are ill, go see them because family's everything. Just make sure you get that exemption before you leave because you may well be locked out.
yeah, and the exemption still doesn't guarantee you that you will get back. So you're going to have to make provision
An
or be
informed decision.
prepared. Yeah, you're going to have to be prepared mentally for the fact that it might be a hard road getting back in the next, especially if it's in the next 2 to 3 months.
Absolutely.
Hopefully after Christmas, normal. But again, who knows? Who's prepared to say? David, America is pretending like everything's back to normal in America, but they're back to almost their record number of deaths per day. Even with their high vaccination rates, they're still, in terms of the human tragedy and misery of the pandemic, they're back at the highest level that they were right at the height of the pandemic before the vaccinations were being rolled out. And that's because of the choices people are making.
700,000 plus deaths.
It's frightening.
700,000.
It's frightening when you think of the scale of it. And look, Australia's been copping a lot of criticism in the international media for the approach that we've taken, the hermit nation, the island fortress, and all that. But I mean, as a community, we don't want those funerals. I think
We
that's the
don't.
decision
We
we've all
don't.
taken. We don't
We
want
don't.
those funerals. The economy is one thing, but hey, if you had a funeral to say goodbye to grandma and grandma was actually 48, that's 30 years of grandma you're never going to have. 30, even 40 years that you're never going to have a grandma. And I think we made that decision. I don't think anyone ever asked us. I just think it's a very widely held view in the community. I think it when they talk about what is it to be Australian, I think that's one of the sort of common value judgments that we didn't all have to talk about. I don't think there's very many people. There might be a couple of thousand of them, but I don't think in the millions of Australians, I don't think you'd find a million Australians who are saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we let all these people die just because we want the fish and chip shop to be open?
I think you're onto something there. It is. What would we classify that Australian value as?
Well, I don't think it's uniquely Australian, but
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 it's manifested itself in this pandemic as something uniquely Australian because everybody
oh,
else appears to have thrown caution to the wind.
I'm pretty sure New Zealand are hanging on to it. And
New Zealand,
I'm
yeah,
pretty sure a lot of those island nations in the Pacific and whatnot. I'm sure there are lots and lots of nations around the world who are thinking the same thing. Hey, we don't have this massive problem here. We don't want this massive problem here. And we don't want a huge proportion of our people to die. Or, as the nurses in one of the press conferences I watched this morning said, hey, there's people who, sure, they were only in ICU for 3 days and they're 28. But guess what? Long COVID's a bitch and it's a bitch for years. And your complications and your medical history are with you now for life. You do not want to get this disease. So,
a lot of people forget about that. A lot of
so
people forget.
I'm one of those people who's prepared to listen to them. I've been subjugated by the state. I've got my double vax, and I'm quite happy to.
But you're immunocompromised, so it's very important for you, and it's very important for me. Also, immunocompromised, so we do get the vaccination because we're at greater risk than other people.
Luckily, I'm not compromised,
Oh,
but
you're not.
no,
I
no,
thought,
I'm not. No, I'm not compromised, but by the fact of having recent surgery for cancer.
That doesn't render you immunocompromised.
No, because it wasn't my liver that was sick or anything, it was my kidney. You and I are older, and I've had the major surgery, which puts me in that category that they vaxxed me. But hey, if I wasn't in that category,
I'd still get it done. You get
I
it
would have
done.
been down there first in line. Here, subjugate me, oppress me. I'm all for it. So
I'll tell you what, it's something we can't avoid in this state, in Victoria in particular. A family friend, builder, got his crew on board for jabs with Dan Murphy vouchers. So
oh, yeah, yeah.
all resistance. The stick never works. The carrot works, and the carrot was Dan Murphy vouchers, which is a great idea because now he's got a workforce that are vaccinated or halfway there with one vax.
But but the funny thing
Australian
is
Australian love for grog was
well,
the incentive to get vaccinated.
that's right. I've got a deeply held belief that I don't want to be vaccinated unless you give me a dozen beers.
100 bucks.
Oh, there we go. 4 dozen beers. 4 have changed my deeply held belief
The
about
carrot.
the oppression of the state. This is where it becomes ridiculous. And look, we're branching off, but hey, let's have a bit of fun. I don't know if I've shared this with the audience before, but I probably have. But it because your worldview is formed by your family and your childhood, right? My dad
Correct.
had polio, which means he had a shriveled leg. He never ran after he was 8 years old. He spent 2 years in an iron lung. Mate, do you reckon having seen firsthand someone living their life, making it past 80 with after having suffered childhood polio, that I would say and support for anyone, yeah, don't get a sensible vaccine. Hey, yeah, don't get the polio vaccine. Don't get the rubella vaccine. Don't get the vaccine for mumps. Hey, don't get the whooping cough vaccine. Ever seen a baby with whooping cough? And to think that you can prevent that, but you wouldn't because you think you're being oppressed. Bloody hell! Go and go and get infected with bloody cholera or polio, and then tell us how bloody oppressed you're being by not having it. You bloody
I've come across a lot of people who've lost relatives in my work who've lost relatives overseas to COVID, who themselves overseas clients have had COVID, and as you said, get a taste of it and see how you feel about a vaccine. Then too many reports coming out of the United States where people have their deathbed regret of not being vaccinated, and it's too late. So people at
well,
least get vaccinated again because it's a virus that shows no mercy.
that's not only happening in the United States. They had 2 nurses, one of the managers of an ICU unit and a general care nurse at the Victorian press conference today. And there was the example of a fella in their 20s who was just about to be intubated and put on the ventilator, who was begging for the vaccine. Like,
Too late.
it's too late once you've got it. And but again, look, I don't want to labour the point, but it's just insane. If you're against vaccines, be against all of them. It makes no sense to be against this one. Be against all of them. And if you've got kids, don't let them get the polio vaccine. Uh, and then you bring them up when they're disformed and they can't breathe. You deal with that. So piss off, you know.
That's this is Grant's message directed to people living south of Byron Bay. I mean, it's a
Oh,
beautiful part of the world, but it's a wacky part of the world, and those listening there would probably be a little grumpy with you. But
I,
blabbering points. There's one point I do want to labour, and if you fast forwarding through this podcast and you've just tuned in now, Grant and I are talking about borders opening and borders closing. Australian citizens, Australian permanent residents will soon be able to travel as long as they've got double vaccination and can verify double vaccination status. But if you're a temporary resident and you're finishing a course, unless you've got compelling compassionate circumstances to travel, do not leave. Apply for your next visa here. Stay here till it is safe to travel, because while it may be safe vaccine wise to travel, we've still got considerations with flights to Australia, flights from Australia, cancellations of flights to and from Australia. But also, I don't know about you, Grant, but what's a ticket cost if you wanted to fly to Bangkok or Manila? in this
Would
climate, or return. What do these tickets cost? Like
um,
extortionate amounts.
let's do the where do we want to go? Bangkok
Well,
aren't letting anyone in because Thailand
okay.
Thailand
Well,
is
all right. Let's
because
use Singapore, the beautiful
yeah,
hub of Singapore.
Singapore
Beautiful, beautiful place.
in October.
Anyone listening from Singapore, I love Old Cheng Kee curry puffs, and if Grant came to Singapore with me, you Grant would love Old Cheng Kee curry puffs as well.
Okay. Cheap flights to Singapore. I'm checking out from Australia to Singapore. Depart when? We'll depart on, let's
Say
say,
say people want,
the 20th of this month.
yeah, all
Um,
right.
okay, and
Or do them
return.
closer. Do them closer to Christmas because people finish their courses closer to Christmas.
Oh,
They get
okay,
they may finish exams now, but they get the results second, third week in November. So
okay.
do
So
something for
all right, December 1. Let's say December 1, and we're going to try and return in
just
January.
January 4, straight after New Year.
January search flights, and I'm not making it not direct. You could might they might route you around the world. And okay, Perth to Singapore, $817.
But to come back though,
I'm not seeing. Hang on, let me. Well, I don't want to look at Perth anyway because they're not letting anyone in.
they're not letting us in, not letting
Uh,
anyone in.
we'll see. Melbourne's not worth looking at. Let's look at Sydney because at least we know with Sydney they're planning to be open. Okay, so
So
Sydney.
the hypothetical student applies for an exemption while they're here. They get an exemption to return to Australia because they're a temporary resident and they need to do that. They have a compelling, compassionate circumstance, or they just want to leave. If they just want to leave to see family, really consider
Well,
leaving at another
that's
time when it's safer to. But if it's compelling, compassionate, give us a price, Grant, for what it is. No price on family, but it's going to be very expensive.
so a return flight, Singapore Airlines. No, you go one way Singapore Airlines and you come back the other way with Emirates,
Yep,
$1,737. So that's actually not too bad. Again, Singapore Emirates 1737.
that's not too bad.
Um,
That's not
uh,
too bad.
not too bad. Yeah, I'm just having a look at yeah, 1,000. So that's sort of 500.
All right, well,
That's not too bad.
that's not bad, but the risk still exists for lockdown, caps reintroduced, flights cancelled, and if you're on a tight timeline to return to Australia to begin work or lodge a visa you haven't lodged before you leave, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself.
yeah. So I don't know what we proved there. I was just going to have a look and see.
I thought the prices might be a little higher, but it doesn't discount the fact that flights can cancel, caps can rise, caps can rise, and you can be trapped where you are. If
I,
you've got work to start in the new year or a deadline for a visa because your student visa is expiring, you're in trouble. What you mustn't do is leave and apply to return from offshore. You must leave, and before you leave Australia, you must apply for an exemption to return. Because if you don't, you'll be locked out.
Now, last week, David, we were talking about the New South Wales 190 skilled migration visa.
Yeah, the 491 program, which probably merits a deeper dive, a deeper look, that's open. The 491 program's open this month,
And
and
the
if you
and the difference is that it's a regional visa, whereas the 190 we talked about was covered all of New South Wales, and you had to already be in New South Wales, working in New South Wales.
whereas with the 491, you can be in New South Wales, working in New South Wales, but there's a stream three where you can be poached, recruited, nominated from another state, which is a godsend for some people. So very important. But what we need to consider though is that the windows to apply open and they close. It's not
Yeah.
round the clock. And the October window has opened, will be open for the whole month. And people who'd expressed interest in New South Wales in the 491, if you've got a registration of interest in last month, you weren't invited in August, that is, you've got to do a new registration of interest. So the registration of interest is illuminating to the state you're interested in that you wish to apply. You've already got an expression of interest in the system. The registration of interest is, hi, I'm Grant, I want to apply for a 491. If you weren't invited in the August submission window and you want to be considered for October, you've got to do it again, apply for another registration of interest. The registration of interest, your old one, does not carry over.
And of course, as we usually say at the end of the episode, if you need a hand with something like this, reach out to David on Twitter or Instagram. On Twitter at David Bongiorno, on Instagram at David underscore A underscore C underscore Bongiorno. But the links will be at the end of the episode to make it
Go,
easy.
I was too slow to get to Instagram, Grant. David Bonjour was already taken.
Yeah, that's right. All right, what's next, David?
Queensland.
Yes.
Well, Queensland people, the Sunshine State has all its attractions. It's arguably the best fruit in the state, the best weather in the state. It's attractive to many for a lot of reasons, but the Queensland program for migration hasn't opened. The migration year began on July 1, and we're now 3rd of October. Queensland still have not opened their program. So watch that space, log on to the Queensland Migration Queensland website, and you'll see that nothing is happening in Queensland yet. What that means is that people looking for a 190 or a 491 from Queensland won't be contacted, will not know what the process is. Well, they won't be contacted because the program's not open. But when it does open, you'll need to see what the requirements are to determine whether you meet the eligibility or not. If you're not eligible, you can't determine whether you're eligible now because the program's not open.
And it looks like that the Queensland government has said we've delayed it, and we've delayed it because there's had to be delays in consulting industry. Now that's probably because of the effects of COVID,
100%.
having the lockdowns and having people quarantined and having people who perhaps work generally in Queensland, but perhaps their family are in other states, so that for the period of the pandemic, they've gone back to be with family because a lot of people obviously are born somewhere, grew up somewhere, but then moved to other states to work. So
Means is if you've got an expression of interest in for a 189 and a 190, but you have a visa that's fast expiring, you've got to find another visa to keep you here while your expression of interest percolates. And when the Queensland program opens, you can register interest in Queensland. If you have a visa fast expiring, you've got to determine what you're eligible for to stay here. Otherwise, you'll have to wait offshore and then apply for the Queensland program if you're interested and eligible offshore. I wouldn't
and
be going offshore at the moment if I was anybody. If it could be avoided, stay here. The 408 visa is a way to stay here. That has a few little twists and tricks, though.
and here's what the Queensland government have said on that matter. If you have a visa expiring, it is suggested to consult with a registered migration agent or an immigration lawyer. Hey, that could be you.
Could be me.
Regarding your alternative migration options. So yes, if you have a visa that is expiring, speak to someone who actually knows what they're talking about to determine what your options are.
If you're in beautiful Brisbane and you're finishing a course or a working visa is expiring and you want to apply for independent migration, the only expression of interest you can apply for if you're eligible, and the only visa you'd be eligible for if you're eligible is a 189, because the 190 we don't know. You apply for a visa that is not on offer at the moment for Queensland. Does that make sense, Grant?
It does.
I'm in Brisbane. I'm an accountant, an IT specialist, a system analyst. I've got 85 points. I can express interest in a 189, but I can't express interest in a 190 for Queensland if I don't know what's in it.
Exactly. And don't assume you know. Don't ask your friend who did something last year. Contact.
Don't ask a senior, because the laws of movable feast. Immigration's second most dynamic area of law in the country after tax. And if you rely on friends from past years who have migrated and got permanent residency, and you rely on what they do, you're putting yourself at grave risk.
So reach out to someone like David, or if you used a migration agent to come here for study or whatever, reach out to someone you already have a connection with and actually get the right information. Hey, if you're in Brisbane,
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder what Lara's doing. A lot of people are still applying for student visas and studying offshore with the hope that the borders will drop and they can come in. Will there be a flood of students applying for student visas when the borders drop? I would expect there'll be a demand, but Canada has been very clever in its marketing of its migration. And I've sent quite a few people to Canada because there's a better prospect of migration for some in some professions than there is in this country.
and David, I'll get a bit of an add in. If you're new to the podcast and you're listening and you're wondering, Lara, is that Lara Bingle? No, it wasn't Lara Bingle. We did an episode about all education agents bad or something like that, and we spoke to an education agent who's not bad.
Who is principled, ethical, and a very good agent.
Yeah, bloody good.
Now, I suppose one thing you've got to consider too, you might feel a little bit jibbed if the Queensland program hasn't. That's an Australian word for you, jibbed. You might feel a little bit
Ripped
disappointed
off.
because, yeah, there's only 8 months of the migration year left. People in Queensland have lost 4 months of opportunity for the 190 and 491 visa. Greener pastures, Grant, just because there's a good offer for a state doesn't mean you're eligible for it. I have been speaking to a lot of people who look at South Australia as a promised land, but all the territories and states have built in little rules, little regulations that prevent people from border hopping to better, greener pastures. So if you are where you are, consider staying where you are. Uh, New South Wales Stream 3 represents an opportunity to move. But do you want to go from Melbourne, and this is said with all respect to people in Dubbo, Wagga, Burke, beautiful country towns, but do you want to go there because the state of New South Wales is offering opportunity there? If you do want to go there, by all means go if you're eligible, but do your research. Do your
Definitely,
research.
definitely. And I'll just say something about, you mentioned South Australia, and of course, there's probably people looking at other states. Remember that they are much, much smaller than Victoria and New South Wales.
And Queensland.
There's not going to be thousands of offers and opportunities.
Correct.
There might be
Correct.
dozens, you know,
Correct.
potentially dozens. I wouldn't be thinking that there would be hundreds or even thousands. It's certainly not thousands.
I mean, let's just take that thought a little further. You don't move from Melbourne to Canberra. You don't move from Sydney to Canberra. Um, it's the Eastern Seaboard's populated for a reason, but the Eastern Seaboard does have its own traps as well. So beware of the Australian Capital Territory unless you're studying or already working there. Doesn't offer opportunity either. It's the nation's capital, but Adelaide, like Perth, like Darwin, very small, and opportunities decrease.
Correct. Now, David, there's another change that we probably need to just bring to people's attention, and that is the
New
way you
email.
apply. Yeah.
You don't. A lot of people. I do visitor visas for some people because they can't be bothered. They don't want to do it, and that's fair enough. And we get them an outcome. If you want to do your own visitor visa, by all means do. But buyer beware. Methods to approach the department to lodge an application will be changing, and you don't want to lodge an application that's invalid because it's a waste of time. And if you lodge an application onshore and it's invalid and your visa's expired, you're in big trouble. So come September, or come now, people applying for 600 visas from outside Australia in any stream must lodge online, must create your own IMI account. And if there's interest, we could do an episode on creating your own IMI account, but it's pretty straightforward, and you do your own application. Now,
Yeah.
it's really important. It's really important to make sure that you follow the instructions for lodging the IMI, for creating an IMI account, and that you understand the system. You don't require IT skills. People do it themselves. It's very important you read what you're doing so you know what you're doing.
Do people make monumental stuff ups, David?
Oh, people forget their passwords. People lock themselves out of their accounts. Then they've got to contact the department and get them to verify their identity, get them to unlock the account. So there's a whole lot of unnecessary stuff. Engage someone to do it. Much easier. I have an account. Have I locked myself out of my account? Once or
I've,
twice. I was on a first name basis with a lot of people in the IT section when I started in 2006 because I kept locking myself out. Look, the thing is this, it's been simplified since then. The IMI account is the way to do it. From early 2022, everybody applying for a visa, for 600 visa, everybody must online with an IMI account. Until then, if you're here, you can apply by IMI account or by posting your application to the Sydney office. And that's an important piece of information. So for the next 2 months, you'll be able to, if you're online, if you're here in Australia and you want to apply for another tourist visa because you've been on tourist visas to stay here, and there are plenty of people who are still on tourist visas here, and Australia is granting them tourist visas here for a whole host of reasons. You can apply by post up until Christmas. From early 2022, you're going to have to get with the times, get modern, get progressive, and lodge online like everyone else from offshore.
it does surprise me, David, and we've been talking about how difficult it's been for people to get back to Australia and whatnot. But I'm surprised that there are people who are getting tourist visas here. I'm not surprised that people are getting the visitor visa subclass 600 in the sponsored family visitor visa or even frequent traveller part of the visa. But very surprised that there are people being granted tourist visas.
They are. What's happened? They've thrown away the genuine temporary. Well, they haven't thrown away the genuine temporary applicant requirement. They haven't thrown it away that your genuine temporary entrant still exists. But I'll give you an example of where a 600 might be granted and then another one granted and another one granted. If a student's too old for a guardian, but they still want their parent for cultural reasons, security reasons, safety, comfort reasons. There are plenty of people who are on student visas who have their mums or dads here looking after them, and good luck to them. I think it's wonderful. And they'll get visas. I know of a couple of people who are on student visas, and their parents, usually the mum, is on to their second or third visitor visa, the second or third, and they'll get another one and another one, quite
But
simply because the
but
students.
do they come in the tourist stream, or is that part of sponsored
Okay,
family?
no, they come in the tourist stream, the 600 visa stream. They're too old for guardian visas because they're in university, but they're doing longer courses and they want their mum or dad in some instances, but usually mum to be around. And mum's a bastion of
I
support.
I I totally understand the need for those people and the requirement
But
to be able to give them a visa, but that seems to me that's not for the purposes of tourism, which
no one's coming in on tourist visas for tourism. People are staying here on visitor visas that were trapped here. We've rolled over many visitor visas for many people while their application's been processed, an offshore application's been processed.
so does that mean that they are already here in the
Correct.
tourist stream so that
Correct. They've
they
come here
haven't
to visit. Come here
they've
to
come
visit a
here on the
spouse.
tourist stream?
309 visa. Somebody's come from offshore to visit their husband or their wife.
But see,
They've got stuck here. They just do another visitor visa, and their application for a 309 offshore partner visa can be processed onshore because of
okay, so they first came here on the 600
to
tourist
see
stream,
to see a
but
loved one.
they're applying for a partner visa. So
Well,
while the application is going on, they can still continue to renew a tourist visa.
a lot of people got stuck coming to visit partners because of the lockdown, and
Yeah.
people who got stuck didn't have to leave the country. They could apply for another visitor visa and roll it over and roll it over. And what the government
But
introduced in the lockdown period was the capacity for people who have offshore partner visas applications and are stuck here, rather than risk infection from COVID, could stay here and have the offshore visa granted onshore. So a person might have come to see their husband or wife when a 309 visa's in the system, an offshore spouse visa, they get trapped because of the lockdown. They came on a visitor visa. Before that visitor visa expires, they do another visitor visa. They get it granted. Because before that second one expires, they do another visitor visa. So they're rolling over visitor visas. And in this rolling over, the government said, all right, people who are stuck here on 309 visas cannot leave, or we don't want them to leave because there's risk of infecting them and the community, will grant those visas onshore. So a lot of people got stuck because they were visiting spouses, and it's one of the few sensible things, or quite a few sensible things, have come out of immigration from the department during COVID. This is one to commend them for having the flexibility and the foresight to realise that so many people would be inconvenienced leaving during COVID and coming back.
yeah, but just to be clear, because I was just wanting to make sure that we aren't granting new 600 tourist visas to people to come here for the purpose of tourism.
Not for
No,
holiday, no, no. People are
no,
coming. People can come in here for business purposes. If people can come here, if people who want to holiday in Australia purely holiday cannot come purely to holiday.
yeah. I just
People
wanted to
who've
clarify
people who
that.
are fighting the COVID battle, people who've got special skills, people who need medical treatment. There's a whole host of people who can still come to
Yeah,
Australia, but nobody's taking a break
yeah.
in the United Kingdom and coming
They're,
to dive on the Great Barrier Reef. No.
they're not coming on the tourist stream. There are other categories that they coming on. I just wanted
Other
to make sure of that.
other visas are being granted, and people are still coming in on visitor visas, but for other purposes.
Yeah, to come here and pretend you're going to make a movie and then not make the movie. So yeah, good on you.
Who is that? Who is that?
Natalie Portman. I used to
Natalie
think she
Portman.
was fantastic, and piss off. I'm never watching one of your films again.
We can
Um,
watch. We can watch. What was it called in Europe? Leon, and in America, in the English release, The Assassin, when she was the
I
grade
don't,
5, grade 6 assassin, and Jean Claude Renoir was
I
her
don't know.
instructor.
I've cancelled her. I'm sorry. Anything else? You can no longer send your applications by courier to the department.
Because at least you know when you send the courier, at least that it's arrived. What happens with the receipting process if you send a visitor visa to the Sydney office? You will get a receipt ultimately, but it's going to be a lot slower than the comfort of knowing the courier has had it signed for by the mailroom in the department. that's progress. We have to live and move with the times. And ultimately, if you want to be safe, safest way is to lodge online.
Yeah,
And when you lodge online, make sure you attach your document.
sure.
Don't think that you've selected it and highlighted it. Make sure you press attach. We get into the minutiae in Migrating to Australia podcast.
Well, I'm sure that's a problem that happens all the time.
It does. It does.
What? But I
It
sent
does.
you those. I sent you those.
People select the article to upload, and they take it from their file, but they don't press it.
Yeah.
The catch to know whether you've done it properly is when you lodge the application, go out of your account, go back to it, and look at attached documents.
Yeah.
Open attached document, and if it says 0 of 100, you haven't done it properly.
Yeah. And you always review your application, don't you? Once it's been
Always.
submitted.
4 or 5 times if you come with David Bongiorno and Associates. That's why we have the impressive record we do. We leave nothing to chance. That's about it. I think we've covered what we needed to cover.
Well, there we go. We did the ad. David is, of course, the principal of David Bongiorno and Associates. And the easiest way to get hold of David is via Twitter or Instagram. On Twitter at David Bongiorno.
At David Bongiorno, DavidBongiorno. Grant, there is some good news this week from the business's perspective. We become teenagers. This week, David Bongiorno and Associates enters its 13th year of providing immigration law to people wanting to come to Australia and stay in Australia. 13.
Are you having a party at home with no guests? Or actually, can you have five guests from one other?
13 years. It's been a long time, but beautiful time. Immigration's changed a lot in that period.
Now, let me get this right. That means your immigration practice is about the same age as your number one child.
Well, I tell you what, people listening, don't ever start a business, buy a house, and have a child in the same year. Don't ever do that. I did. 13 years later, I'm still a hamster on the wheel.
When did the dog enter the equation?
Oh, beautiful Dolly, my 3-year-old dachshund. She's lovely. Anyone who has dachshunds will know they're independent, strongly willed, and highly intelligent.
Yeah, no appearance from Dolly this week because you're recording in the office, not at home, as you have been for so long.
I'll tell you what, I can't wait till you're back in and we'll go into the boardroom and record like the old days. God knows when that will happen.
Under the roadmap, David, when is that scheduled to be allowed? Are we able to do that in November?
I'm watching the space because, as you said earlier at the start, or when we were talking off podcast, it's a movable feast, and God knows what's going to happen to derail the intended plan. Inevitably, there'll be some hiccups, some setbacks, and that's why I stressed the point today about travel to Australia or travel from Australia. International students, temporary residents, really be careful. Really think about whether if family is sick, you must go, obviously. But if you just want to see family and they're enjoying good health, wait, be patient, and travel when it is safer.
And if there's one thing I've learned lately, David, is that when a leader of a state, a territory, or a nation, any politician is talking about a roadmap, what they're really talking to is something that is more akin to a drunken sketch on a napkin or the torn off lid of a pizza box.
I think you're onto something there. I think you're onto something. It's not until it's in, and I just stay here. Stay where you are. If you do need to travel, we've done all we can to advise the dangers. You make an informed decision. The choice is yours.
Absolutely. So, hey, enjoy springtime in Australia. If you're here, enjoy the sunshine.
It's the first bit of sunshine we've had in spring, isn't it? Really, it's what 21, 22 degrees today. Boring to talk about the weather, but if you're from Melbourne and you've been through this lockdown with us, it's actually quite exciting to have some sunshine. Get out and get some fresh air.
I'm lucky, even though I live in COVID Alley. I'm in that part of Melbourne where often when the bands of rain are pelting down on you, David, we miss them. So it's often quite nice weather where I am, but it is quite joyous at the moment. The birds are going crazy, doing what birds do in springtime, and the footy season is over, and now we get here in Australia. We start to look forward to a whole lot of cricket and maybe some tennis, and then the hot weather, and we're hopeful, aren't we, David?
We're hopeful. Novak Djokovic will be very hopeful that he gets in for the Australian Open if he's not going to get vaccinated. But tennis, cricket. It's the best part of the year to be in Melbourne, best part of the year to be in Australia. We've got sunshine and people are generally a lot happier as a result. Grant, have a lovely Sunday, mate.
Thank you, David. I don't want to talk about the day because that makes it. That means if I'm a bit lax in releasing the
I'm
episode,
putting pressure on you to get it up.
gets me under the pump. But, dear listener, we will be watching the Novak Djokovic situation with interest. I will be looking to see whether our bureaucracy treats some an avowed anti-vax in a different way than some Australian who's been stuck surfing couches in the Midlands of the UK in the same way.
And so I'll ask a question in my limited. Is he a good boy? First
Uh,
person to answer. First person to answer to message to Grant gets. Well, what do they get? They can't get a coffee with you and me because we're not. We haven't seen each other physically in the same space for how long now? Since March of last year.
uh, didn't we? Didn't we say it was even
Well,
longer
longer.
than I can't remember. But hey, if anyone wants to message and say, tell me what what I should refer to Novak Djokovic as, and it begins with a K.
Oh, but that's cool.
Yeah,
No, I think people might consider him an ankle Grant. There's a bit of local humour for you because he's 2 foot lower.
yeah. Look, I don't know. Regular listeners know that I hate it when there's a double standards applied to entry, and that because someone's rich and famous, they can get in, and somebody who
He's not
uh,
rich and famous can't.
yeah,
Yeah.
someone who's a duck farmer from Vietnam but has family here can't get in. Or
Mm.
the thing I keep saying, all the Australians who have been working overseas and those contracts have finished, but then they get back here.
It's very
Yeah,
sad. It's very
I,
sad.
I
I
just
do
get
hope I do hope for everyone's sake that what was put out on Friday by the Prime Minister, by the government, actually is realised on the timeline that it is, because a lot of people have been suffering for way too long and unnecessarily.
and David, I can't resist. If we were a TV show, this is where we would cut to the montage. Far away, Gladys. But we are the TV show, and we can't do that.
We won't go anywhere near that. Have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you've appreciated that we really do need to have a bit of fun with lockdown fatigue.